For almost a century, if you saw yellow paint in black letters on a piece of heavy equipment, you knew exactly what you were looking at. Caterpillar. The name practically means construction in half the languages on Earth. Diesel power, built to outlast the job site itself. Then a Chinese company most Americans have never heard of rolled out a 72-ton excavator that runs on batteries alone, matching the digging force of Caterpillar's biggest diesel machines without burning a single drop of fuel. The company is called SANY, and the machine that should worry Caterpillar most isn't even the big one. It's a 40-ton model called the SY375E, carrying a battery pack so large, 550 kilowatt hours, that it holds roughly as much energy as 5 or 6 electric cars combined. Except this battery doesn't sit under a sedan. It sits inside a machine built to rip concrete and stone out of the ground. All day, every day. Here's what makes that number worth sitting with. A battery that size isn't a science experiment or a trade show concept. It's already shipping to real job sites in real cities, doing real work that used to belong entirely to diesel. For decades, the assumption in heavy construction was simple. Batteries were for cars, diesel was for machines that actually had to work hard. Anything that moved that much dirt all day long needed real fuel, not a charger. That assumption just broke, and it broke in a country most of the industry wasn't watching closely enough. Nobody handed SANY this moment. The company built toward it for decades, steadily climbing through categories most people never think about. Long before anyone outside China's construction sector had a reason to know the name, it now carries into job sites worldwide. Let's be honest about the company on the other side of this story, because the real numbers make SANY's rise more impressive, not less. Caterpillar isn't some fading giant caught flat-footed. In its most recent fiscal year, the company pulled in roughly $68 billion in revenue and more than $10 billion in profit. It still holds the largest share of the global construction equipment market, and it remains, by almost any financial measure, the strongest company in this entire industry. That's exactly what makes what's happening so remarkable. Back in 2012, Caterpillar's best year on record, Chinese equipment makers combined held less than 2% of the overseas market. Today, SANY alone has climbed into the top 3 construction equipment makers on Earth, and Chinese manufacturers together now control close to a third of overseas sales in markets outside their own borders. This isn't a story about Caterpillar collapsing overnight. It's a story about the specific ground Caterpillar is losing, one job site at a time, in exactly the category that's about to matter most: electric, zero-emission, city-ready heavy machinery. If you are into stories about technology changing the world in ways nobody expected, hit that like button and subscribe, because you're about to see exactly how a company that started as a small welding shop caught up to, and in some ways passed, the most recognizable name in construction. Cities around the world are tightening emissions, rules, and noise restrictions on construction sites year after year. Diesel excavators, the kind Caterpillar built its entire reputation on, are increasingly banned outright from certain urban job sites during specific hours, or hit with fines steep enough to make contractors think twice. That regulatory shift didn't create SANY's opportunity out of nothing. It handed a rapidly improving challenger the exact opening it needed, at the exact moment it was ready to use it. Contractors bidding on public infrastructure projects in Europe increasingly face zero-emission requirements written directly into the contract terms, not just polite suggestions. A diesel-only fleet locks a construction company out of an entire category of work before the bidding even starts. That's not a hypothetical risk sitting somewhere in the future. It's already shaping which equipment purchases contractors make today. So how does a company founded as a welding equipment maker in a Chinese industrial city end up building the excavator that makes a 100-year-old American icon look like it's standing still? That answer starts decades before anyone in Beijing had heard the word lithium. SANY didn't start as a heavy equipment company at all. In 1989, a small group of engineers in Changsha, a mid-sized city in China's Hunan province, founded the company to make welding materials, not excavators, not cranes, just the raw supplies other manufacturers used to build things. For years, that's exactly what SANY stayed: a supplier working in the shadow of bigger, more established names. But the founders had bigger ambitions, and by the 1990s, the company had pushed into concrete machinery, then cranes, then eventually the excavators that would come to define its global reputation. Growth stayed steady but unremarkable for a long stretch. Then China's construction boom hit full stride in the 2000s, and SANY rode that wave harder and faster than almost any of its domestic competitors. By pouring money into research and undercutting foreign competitors on price, often 20 to 30% cheaper than equivalent Japanese or American machines, SANY grew from a regional player into China's largest construction equipment maker, then pushed outward into international markets. That international push wasn't gentle or gradual either. SANY built dealer networks, service centers, and spare parts inventories across Europe, Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia, the exact support system a foreign buyer needs before trusting an unfamiliar brand with a six-figure equipment purchase. Building that trust took years of consistent delivery, not a single flashy product launch. The real pivot came in the 2020s, when the company made a deliberate bet that most of the traditional industry was still treating as a side project: full electrification of heavy machinery. Between 2023 and 2025, SANY rolled out an entire family of electric excavators, starting small with compact urban models like the SY35E, then scaling up fast. By 2025, the lineup included the 25-ton SY215E, certified for European markets, and the 40-ton SY375E, with its enormous swappable battery pack. That same year, the company delivered a 72-ton, fully electric excavator, a machine large enough to compete directly in heavy mining and major civil construction work, the exact segment everyone assumed diesel would dominate forever. None of this happened by accident. China's own domestic market was already shifting hard toward electric vehicles and batteries at massive scale, backed by companies like CATL, the world's largest battery maker. SANY didn't have to build its own battery supply chain from scratch. It simply plugged into one of the most advanced battery industries on the planet, already sitting right next door. Compare that timeline to how long it typically takes an established Western manufacturer to shift direction at scale. Legacy companies carry decades of engineering built around diesel, dealer networks trained on diesel maintenance, and supply contracts locked in years in advance. SANY carried almost none of that weight. Being younger in this specific race turned out to be an advantage rather than a disadvantage. That's the part worth understanding before anything else. SANY's electric excavators aren't a lucky one-off invention. They're the output of a company that spent 3.5 decades climbing, deliberately, from welding supplier to global manufacturer, landing its biggest bet at the exact moment the rest of the world started demanding exactly what it had already built. None of that climb happened in isolation from the broader shift in Chinese manufacturing either. SANY grew up alongside an entire generation of Chinese industrial companies, learning to compete globally on quality as much as price, not just the cheap and basic reputation Chinese exports carried decades earlier. That broader shift matters here because it's the same environment that produced the battery supply chain SANY now leans on so heavily. Start with the single detail that makes SANY's electric excavators actually usable on a real job site. Instead of just an interesting concept, the batteries come out. Most people picturing an electric vehicle imagine plugging it in and waiting. That works fine for a car sitting in a driveway overnight. It works terribly for a piece of construction equipment that a contractor needs running for 10 or 12 hours straight, with no room in the schedule for a multi-hour charging break in the middle of the day. SANY's answer, most visible on the SY375E, is a battery pack built to be swapped out entirely, not just plugged in. Picture changing the propane tank on a gas grill instead of waiting for it to refill itself. When one battery runs low, a fresh, fully charged pack takes its place in minutes, and the machine goes straight back to work while the depleted battery charges elsewhere. That single design choice solves the exact problem that killed earlier attempts at electric heavy equipment. Uptime is everything on a construction site. A contractor doesn't care how clean or quiet a machine is if it spends half the day sitting idle, waiting on a charger. Swappable batteries turn an electric excavator from a compromise into a genuine, like-for-like replacement for diesel, at least on the one metric contractors actually get paid to care about: hours of work completed per day. Earlier electric construction equipment mostly avoided this problem simply by staying small. Compact excavators, the kind used for light residential work, could get away with overnight charging because their workload was lighter to begin with. Scaling that same charge and weight model up to a 40-ton machine doing heavy mining work would have meant hours of downtime every single day. Swappable batteries are the specific engineering choice that lets SANY skip that trade-off entirely, rather than simply building a bigger battery and hoping charging speed would eventually catch up. The SY375E runs on a 200 kilowatt permanent magnet synchronous motor, a type of electric motor known for delivering strong, consistent torque without the power loss that plagues older motor designs. Paired with the machine's hydraulic system, it produces 235 kilonewtons of bucket digging force, a number SANY says matches its diesel-powered equivalents almost exactly. Picture the difference between a diesel engine and an electric motor the way you'd picture two different ways of pulling a heavy sled. A diesel engine builds up power gradually, revving higher to generate more force, burning fuel the entire time it's working. An electric motor delivers strong pulling force almost instantly, the moment current flows through it, with none of the lag or wasted energy that comes from revving an engine up to speed. That instant response is part of why operators who've tested these machines report the digging feel is comparable, sometimes even sharper, than the diesel machines they're used to. Strip away the engine entirely, and you also strip away everything that used to come with it: exhaust systems, fuel tanks, cooling systems built around burning diesel, and the constant vibration and noise those systems generate. What's left is a simpler machine, mechanically, even while it matches or exceeds the working power of what it's replacing. That reduction in mechanical complexity matters more than it might sound. Fewer moving parts means fewer things that can break down mid-project, and fewer scheduled maintenance visits pulling the machine off the job site entirely. A diesel engine needs regular oil changes, filter replacements, and exhaust system upkeep. An electric motor, with far fewer wear points, needs comparatively little of that ongoing attention. The last piece of the puzzle isn't about power at all. It's about what the machine can see and what it can tell a fleet manager sitting miles away. SANY's newer electric excavators come equipped with camera systems providing a full 360-degree view around the machine, feeding into onboard software designed to flag pedestrians, workers, or obstacles the operator might not notice from inside the cab. On a busy urban job site surrounded by pedestrians and other equipment, that kind of automated awareness isn't a luxury feature. It's the difference between a minor near miss and a genuine accident report. Layered on top of that is remote telematics, letting fleet managers track battery levels, machine location, and maintenance needs from a phone or laptop without ever setting foot on site. That's not a new idea in this industry. Caterpillar built an entire competitive advantage around its own version of this technology for years. What's changed is that a rapidly rising Chinese manufacturer is now shipping a comparable system, bundled directly into machines already undercutting Western competitors on price. For a company running dozens of machines across multiple sites, that visibility changes how the entire fleet gets managed day to day. Instead of dispatching someone to physically check on a machine's status, a manager can see battery charge levels and maintenance flags from an office computer, catching problems before they turn into an idle machine and a missed deadline. Bundling that capability into a machine already cheaper to buy and cheaper to run adds up to a seriously difficult package for a competitor to match feature for feature. Put the battery swap, the motor, and the AI monitoring together, and you get a machine that isn't just cheaper to run than diesel. It's arguably easier to manage at scale across an entire fleet than the equipment that's dominated this industry for 100 years. Everything so far, the swap system, the motor, the cameras, is seriously impressive engineering, but none of it explains the part that should worry Caterpillar's boardroom the most. The real advantage isn't sitting inside the excavator at all. It's sitting behind it in China's battery supply chain. SANY didn't have to invent battery manufacturing from scratch, negotiate years of supply contracts, or bet billions on building its own cell production. It's simply plugged into an ecosystem that already existed next door. CATL, the single largest battery manufacturer on the planet, supplying cells at a scale and a cost structure no Western company can currently match, because no Western company has anything close to the same manufacturing base to draw from. Picture two companies trying to build the exact same electric excavator, one in China, one in the United States. The Chinese company orders battery cells from a domestic supplier, already producing them by the hundreds of millions, at prices driven down by years of relentless competition and government-backed investment. The American company has to source cells from a much smaller supply base, often paying a real premium, while also absorbing tariffs on any components that do come from overseas. Same battery chemistry, same basic engineering, wildly different costs to build. That gap doesn't show up as some abstract statistic buried in an annual report. It shows up directly on the price tag a contractor sees when comparing machines side by side. Two excavators, roughly equal in digging power and build quality, can end up separated by a meaningful percentage in upfront cost, purely because one manufacturer's battery supplier sits down the street and the other sits an ocean away, subject to shipping costs and import duties on top of the base price. That's the actual advantage here, and it has almost nothing to do with SANY's own cleverness as an engineering company. Any competitor with enough money could eventually design a comparable swap system or a comparable motor. What's far harder to copy overnight is an entire domestic battery industry, built up over more than a decade of deliberate investment, sitting conveniently right next to your factory floor. The excavator is the visible part of this story. The invisible part is the supply chain underneath it. And that's the piece Caterpillar can't simply out-engineer its way past. Three companies actually sit exposed to this shift, and they're not all in the same position, so it's worth being specific about each one, rather than lumping the entire industry together. Caterpillar remains the industry's dominant name by revenue and profit, and nothing here changes that fact overnight. But its exposure is specific and real. The electric, emissions-restricted urban segment of this market is growing fastest. And it's exactly the segment where a rapidly rising Chinese competitor now holds a real technical and cost lead. Caterpillar's own electric offerings exist, but they remain smaller in scale and scope than what SANY is already shipping to real job sites. Komatsu, the Japanese manufacturer that spent decades trading the #2 spot with Caterpillar, faces a nearly identical problem. Deep diesel expertise, a century of brand trust, and comparatively modest electric offerings against a Chinese battery supply chain, it has no easy or quick way to match on cost. Both companies have announced their own electric equipment plans, and neither is standing completely still. But announcing a plan and matching a competitor already shipping mature, battery swappable machines at scale, backed by the cheapest battery supply chain on Earth, are two very different positions to be in. Volvo Construction Equipment deserves a different kind of mention here because it's actually the one Western brand racing hard rather than watching from behind. Volvo CE has pushed further into fully electric, serial-produced machinery than either Caterpillar or Komatsu, treating electrification as a genuine strategic priority rather than a side project. That doesn't erase China's cost advantage, but it does prove the response isn't universal. Some Western manufacturers saw this coming. Most didn't move fast enough. Volvo's early bet doesn't fully close the cost gap either, since it still buys battery cells from a supply chain nowhere near as deep or as cheap as China's. But it shows the difference between a company treating electrification as an inevitable shift worth preparing for years in advance, and companies that treated it as a distant possibility worth revisiting later, sometime after the current fiscal year's numbers looked more comfortable. That distinction, more than any single spec sheet, is likely to decide which Western manufacturers stay competitive in this category over the next decade. None of this plays out as a sudden collapse. Contracts, dealer relationships, and decades of trust in diesel reliability don't disappear in a single product cycle. But every year the emissions rules tighten, and every year SANY's battery costs keep falling, alongside China's own manufacturing scale, the gap gets harder for anyone starting from a diesel-first foundation to close. Watch what happens at the next major construction equipment trade show, and the pattern will likely repeat itself. More battery electric models from Chinese manufacturers, priced aggressively, backed by a supply chain Western competitors still can't fully replicate. Meanwhile, established brands will keep announcing their own electric roadmaps, incrementally, years behind the pace SANY has already set on its own factory floor. A 100-year head start built an empire around one fuel. It never accounted for the moment someone else controlled the battery instead. That's the part worth carrying away from all of this. Not a prediction about which brand wins next year's sales numbers, but a reminder that dominance built on one energy source only lasts as long as that source stays the cheapest, most practical option on the market.